Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 18, Period Styles, a review of the Incarnate West. Western culture is bred of yoked opposites, Greco-Rome and Yahweh East. The Greek word for beautiful is kalos, which is also the word for good, and it becomes, for Socratic reason, identical with knowing, ugliness and evil reduced to deceptive masks of ignorance. So in the Republic, then the just is like the wise and good, and the unjust like the evil and the ignorant. Then virtue is the health and beauty and well-being of the soul, and vice the disease and weakness and deformity of the same. Or the Protagoras, since all virtues are knowledge, including justice and temperance and courage. Against the Attic celebration of that harmony, where the goddess Demeter gives the king of Eleusis the sacred grain, while Kore crowns him. The Roman will to apply Greek knowledge and beauty for the legal ordering of self and world seems a leap, as from Homer to Virgil, from vibrance to discipline, as Wade as Mesommedes' hymn to the sun, or Vespasian's choice of Domitian for his heir. Yet what are these contraries but lobes of the twofold classical command for which Plutarch paralleled the lives of Greeks and Romans? It becomes a man's duty to pursue and make after the best and choicest of everything, virtue creating at once admiration of the things done and desire to imitate the doer. So we have thought fit to spend time and pains in writing the lives of famous persons. Are they not equally opposed to the earth-searing zeal which had been building up for 2 millennia in the Semitic crescent, beauty and good as far apart as Yaffe and Pob, as far as Egyptian bondage from the beautiful in his cloak of many hues, all that pride thrown down and exalted by the unnameable? The earth saw and trembled, the hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord. Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Let that build through the ferment witnessed in art by the 1st century frescoes from Dura on the Euphrates, through the teacher of righteousness of the Dead Sea Scrolls, through Christ, John, and Paul, to a symbolic flame, in which this realm, Rome, and all fuse in revelation. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So bring it to bear on the soul hunger and itch of flesh which the Greco-Roman overreach and inward erosion had become. Longinus of the 3rd century with a statue of Commodus. As some children always remain pygmies, our tender minds, fettered by a just servitude, are unable to expand. And Paul, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts. Seed that moody decay with the faith paradox of Augustine's City of God. It is incredible that Christ should rise again in the flesh and carry it up to heaven with him. It is incredible that the world should believe this, and it is incredible that this belief should have been effected by a small sort of poor, simple, unlearned men. The proofs, the persuasions lay not in words, but in wonders. If all the world believed without miracles, that remains a miracle as great as the rest. While the barbarian overthrow of the outward fulfills the judgment turn of spirit, Jerome, by their speed they outstripped rumour, and they took pity neither upon religion, nor rank, nor age, nor wailing childhood, but filled the whole earth with slaughter and panic. But already this 6th century Lombard King Agilulf was baptized, throned, and sworded like judgment God in the anomaly of warrior Christianity, as if the trumpet of radical texts, deflected in the dark age gyre of force, summoned through doom toward earth renewal. That would be the first task for the West, to convert the twilight farewell of late classical Christianity, as in the Gregorian Tenebrae, or this 3rd century beardless Christ in the Roman Thermae. Through the upsurge rooted in the Dark Ages, this 700 Rothwell cross left, with the runes carved on it, Silicra treo, on lyft laden, leorta bewunden, beama beortost, to the intensity of the 12th century dawn, the judgment Christ of Vézelay, right, with Perotin. Here memories of the sweet and sour of Hellenism, of its refinement and question, do not arise as with Tertullian and Julian the Apostate, either as an evil to be shunned or good to be pursued. That is all drowned. Surrender is as automatic as the stark reserve of primitive style, the mounting of stripped earth, self, and desire on affirming creed. So within the single voice line of Perotin's Beata Viscera, we have come as far from Gregorian as from pole to pole. If the period styles of the West find their archetype in God's assumption of flesh and world, how fiercely that first coming stares through space and time. The second task was to widen the faith grip, to diversify the life it contains. In that Gothic ambivalence of joy and denial, the springtime of earth smiles creed acceptance. So Ars Nova music reaches from this Pierre Delacroix through De Vitry to the century's end. By 1300, this paradise tympanum of Leon Cathedral teems with the life Juan Ruiz, archpriest of Ito, would pour about 1330 into his book of good love. Such lusty matter as Snub-Nose the Tough, mountain cowgirl, who lugs the priest to her hut and feeds him for a bout. Comamos deste pan duro, después faremos la lucha. Narratives gemmed with festal poems. Dia era muy santo de la Pascua Mayor. It was the holy day of Easter. The sun came golden from the grove, and men and birds and flower clusters welcomed him, chanting to love. Had not Jean de Meung's continuation of the Romance of the Rose called forth the orders and ranks which Chaucer, 100 years later, would set on pilgrimage? Knight, squire, yeoman, prioress, nun, monk, friar, merchant, clerk, man of law, franklin, shipman, doctor, wife of Bath, parson, ploughman, miller, reeve, summoner, pardoner, host, alchemist, and more. Next was to craft and shape those suspended vitalities, to give them the modes and proportions of the dimensional, a task which, as Vasari stresses, dominates Italian painting from early Giotto, this detail of a boy drinking at St. Francis' miraculous spring. To the Leonardo tide of 1500, this Giambellini bark of love, while music in its passage from Ars Nova toward the temporal moods of major and minor fills the chords of Dalzer's lute preludes. Nor was the translation of symbol into the sensuous language of earth confined to Italy. It equally possessed the 1500 North. The globe of Bellini's watery Venus is curiously matched the same years by the bubble calm of Bosch's secret lovers. So, like Josquin's Allégez-moi, dessous la boudinette, an English lyric weaves its moony Beulah. In arms he hent that lady gent, in voiding care and moan. That day they spent to their intent in wilderness alone. In the happy convergence of sacred and secular, the Talheim altar angel smiles ravishingly. The In Dulce Jubilo receives Sicher's organ setting, while Skelton applies the poetry of Mary to a fetching girl. Star of the morrow grey, the blossom on the spray, the freshest flower of May. It were an heavenly health, it were an endless wealth, a life for God himself, to hear this nightingale among the birdies small, warbling in the vale, dug dug, jug jug, good year and good luck, with chuck chuck, chuck chuck. But that incarnation heightens also the woes of flesh. Death in the dark ages had been the hope of devotion. As life aspires from that ground, 14th century Pucelle, or a follower, illuminates the living and the dead. Three proud horsemen, confronted by three corpses, as Chaucer a few years later would take it up in the clean irony of the pardoner's tale. Now, sires, quoth he, if that ye be so lief to find out death, turn up this crooked way. See ye that oak? Right there ye shall him find. After 1500, the eruption in Holbein, Baldung Green, this Deutsch of life's claim and dance of death's seizure, heightens toward the vortex of the tragic stage. The same Skelton who had warbled for Isabel keens upon a dead man's skull. Our days be dated to be checkmated with drafties of death stopping our breath, our iron sinking, our bodies stinking, our gummies grinning, our soulless brinning. O goodly child of Mary mild, then be our shield, that we be not exiled to the dun dale of bootless bale, nor to the lake of fiendish black. The central wonder is the meeting of two modes of reality, medieval and Renaissance. Nature, never better rendered, as in Memlink's vision of John, fulfills itself in Revelation. Here the horsemen of war, famine, and death, with hell following after. So an English poem of 1500 lifts a romance wandering to the anagogical. He bare him up, he bare him down, he bare him into an orchard brown. In that orchard there was an hall that was hanged with purple and pall, and in that hall there was a bed, it was hanged with gold so red. And in that bed there lieth a knight, his woundes bleeding day and night. By that bedside kneeleth a May, and she weepeth both night and day. And by that bedside there standeth a stone, Corpus Christi, written thereon. That wounded knight, the body of Christ. So in this Metzis variant of a lost Jan van Eyck, we see the mirrored omnivoyant of God as man become the Western archetype. If our culture has a focus, it must be there, in the threefold coming, passion, and expected resurrection of a divine, self-enmeshed in flesh and world. Or is it always impossible to fix the oneness of a culture, as of the name-bearing families and species of nature, which we still may recognize through all their variety, like the known face of a friend? Spengler and Toynbee thought to line up cultures as you would the repetitive life cycles of a plant. But plants reenact what evolution has staked out for them, whereas history is at the exploratory tip of evolution itself, that tree which elaborates the new. Its recurrences waver through a growth web of branchings. In this basalt Buddha, we have simultaneously to experience a Neoplatonic and early Christian parallel in soul's withdrawal from the veil of Maya, and a difference in the sensuous languor here of soul's ecstasy. To observe a oneness with the whole family of Buddhist cultures spread over Asia and through 1,000 years, and the signature in this caressed volcanic rock of the 5th century Gupta school of North India. How richly other and same is this colossal limestone from a century or so later and 2,500 miles away. With what triumph the mystic avatar is here seated on the ceremonious refinements of Tang and Confucian Honan. Again, after 6 centuries and more, in Kamakura, Japan, with how immediate a life grace this Shinto deity assumes in painted wood and with crystal eyes the guise of Buddhist priest. A whole civilization emanates from him, rock gardens and perfect houses, silks and flowered screens, the poetic courtliness that gives the loves of Genji the art of a calligraphic scroll. We remember in the West the gradual assimilation of the Dark Age fierce Christ to the suavities of every day, and we ask, was the entire related earth ripening toward the temporalities it now militantly demands? For the West, if its essential motion is the reading over of the eternal kingdom into the actual, its incarnate one should exhibit 2 phases, as its modes are still mysterious and earthless. This 11th century crucified Christ from the region of the Meuse in Belgium, or as even its mysteries take flesh in the here and now. It is in the many-dimensioned continuum which leads from the Romanesque Gothic beginnings through the deep personalization of Rembrandt's 1661 Risen Christ that we must define a spectrum of period styles. Where each pole of that suspended one many must be seated with its opposite, Carolingian already called a Renaissance, that human penetration of the sacred shaping before 1100 the haunting pity of the Tongre Christ, or in music soon after, this Planctus for the death of Berenguer. While late Rembrandt magnifies light, space, drama by their seeming sacrifice to the Christ mystery, so the passions of the old Schütz, about 1664, strip the polychoral to a single voice as of chant, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Mein Gott, mein Gott, mein Gott, warum hast du mich verlassen?
But charged with the tensile will of Baroque, like yin-yang, the plot from Romanesque to this. If the primary cleavage is of the timeless against time, ring first the changes of last and changeless things, apocalypse. Yet even apocalypse would rear in time a spatial throne. At Dark Age ground before 1000, the hell of a Mozarabic Beatus commentary presents in symbolic depiction with the Silos Creed the literal nothingness of the earth to be dissolved. Leap 400 years of Romanesque and Gothic to the Angers apocalypse, and in music to the school of Machaut. Here expression, always more earth-embodied, still serves the non-dimensional. How gradual at first, how hyperbolic at last, the empowering which by 1600 would break all stabilities of the geocentric but God-centered world. Dura, 1496, time of the masses of Josquin, or of this Obrecht, holds the symbolic line of Gothic. But when the first four trumpets sound, the sky shattering like glass, the cloudy firmament rolled up as a scroll, the things of nature blown like withered leaves, it is the created real which takes the cyclone of spiritual doom, the dimensional earth on which the files fall. As the Christian struggle, then assuming passionate body, swept the new men and nations, economy, science, in the whirl of its religious wars. Though the climax delays another 100 years, the great style divides, suspiciously hugging the centuries. It flames in the last works of El Greco and of Giovanni Gabrieli. as if what Renaissance art and thought had dared. Bruno's infinite universe of besouled material worlds, this earth, sun and moon, planets and innumerable stars, were swept in the muskostrom of now physical doom. It is the dynamic divide between the explosive mannerism of late Renaissance and another country with more gravitational laws. In Rubens' 1620, the Last Judgment itself is a pageant of corporeal triumph and display. For more than 100 years, the pomp of Baroque churches, the might of fugal music, the causal order of the universe would assert the timeless and spaceless by a phenomenal opera. How majestic its scenery, how reasoned its chords, staged exactly to the converse values. Perhaps the halfway mark from Dark Age symbol to Rubens' blubber hell, and curiously like that fall, a fountaining blast and fiery tongue of the damned, though in the clarity of Gothic wit, its counterpole is this Paul de Limbourg about 1416, while in Dufay's earliest mass, Dufay, who would later bring Renaissance almost to the embodied force of Josquin, we hear the 1420 continuance of such angular thinness and mood suspension, those double leading tones and bare fifths of Ars Nova. Let both stand midway in that first phase of the twofold West, the enfleshment of eschatology. Against which the arts of earthly joy had been springing from the judgment ground, preparing for the Western incarnation's second phase. Though in this 13th century mirror case of the Castle of Love, as in the music of triple runs hung over bare fifth loyalty, this motet based on Adam de la Halle's Robin Loves Me, Robin Has Me. In these, as in the acausalities of dream romance, delight is as brittle, as thin as its spatial rendering. In the museum and concert hall without walls, moments, the dawn birth of 1400, are always ours, as the dream lovers in May of the Très Riche Earls and to Binchois de plus en plus issue from the castle through a little wood into a hawthorn-flowered space, which first gives them ground to think their pleasures real. Charles d'Orléans. Summer's harbingers have come. Les fourrières d'Este sont venues pour appareiller son logis, et ont fait tendre ses tapis de fleurs et de verdure tissus. A 100 years and even myth Titian's Bacchanal of Andros stakes out a summer shore for the rapt enfleshment of the dance of wine and love. That dynamic of sense, as in the Ricercares of Willert, is a battle call which turns the 16th century to a field of moral war. By the Cartesian 17th, Rubens complements enfleshed apocalypse with a life rapture where chivalric dream and pagan myth lift this moated castle, the artist, his wife, and guests on a validating wave of present good. Like Royalist England, William Law's, Johnson's, Penshurst, thou hast thy walks for health as well as sport, thy mount to which the Dryads do resort, where Pan and Bacchus their high feasts have made, beneath the broad beech and the chestnut shade. Herrick's, come, my Corinna, come, let's go a-maying. See how Aurora throws her fair, fresh quilted colours through the air. Get up, sweet slug a-bed, and see the dew bespangling herb and tree. That may have been the prime of the European fruitful earth. Since by the 18th century of Gainsborough fielding this on, transport of possessing, though the glorious revolution Locke and common law have laid a firmer base, both in philosophy and custom, for the freehold pride of cornucopian ground, the skeptic edge of enlightenment already undercuts the Lord and Lady Booby of the sunlit heritage. With Moritz von Schwind's mid-19th century waking, as in those tearful meltings into the major, which Schubert taught Schumann, Liszt this Brahms, the wedding of expected joy has been overextended. So parents used to say when children could not stop giggling, your tickling string is hanging out, and it's going to get stepped on. By the end of the century, the overstretching breaks in Nietzschean scorn. Thus, from Brahms to Mahler, is Toulouse-Lautrec's Messaline named for the silk or for Emperor Claudius' cruel profligate? Or is it exactly the silken opulence centuries had been in search of, which stirs this consciously late Roman surfeit of flesh and venom of soul? As in Pound's blast, they howl, they complain that the twitching of 3 abdominal nerves is incapable of producing a lasting nirvana. If the earth titan for whom Mahler named the first symphony is the alienation of that God who took on time and flesh, what resurrection his title for the second was at hand. So far, we have felt out the dual incarnation of the whole. In that continuum, we have now to trace and name the century-by-century changes of the style moon. First, we lay it down as if it were true, though birth was stirring even there, the stripped negation of the Dark Age ground. Dogmatic reduction, we say, has become, with the Christianized tribes of the North, the automatic home, this jeweled reliquary of Sainte Foy, throned over the mortal shroud. As shoots of Romanesque Gothic spring from that ground, they work in creative tension with its otherworldly creed. Year by year, the bare field of damnation and prayer gathers more of earth's compromising life. Nicholas of Verdun's 1180 resurrection raises God into time. So scholasticism reshapes the faith it acclaims, planting reason in Tertullian's paradox, incarnation sure because impossible. Reason, like digestion, can dissolve its own frame. So with the speculation of the Greeks, but medieval question begins and ends in dogma. It is the protection of the transrational fabric from the energy to be released there, which makes possible the giant constructions of Gothic and Renaissance, a dialectical buttressing of which the cathedral is an outward sign. Consider Laon, with Thomas Aquinas' triple vaultings over the insoluble One as Father, Word, and Spirit, both changeless and active in the world. It would seem there cannot be any procession in God, for procession signifies outward movement, but in God there is nothing subject to motion, no diversity. On the contrary, Christ says, "From God I proceeded." I answer, as outward procession to external matter, inward procession to the intelligible Word, one with the source whence he proceeds. It would seem that procession cannot be called generation. On the contrary, it is said, "This day have I begotten thee." I answer, not generation from non-being to being, but the origin of a living being from a conjoined living principle, as a man proceeds from a man. But procession does not end with the Word. There is another of the Spirit, called the procession of love. Lest we slide to a pantheism of infinite processions, I answer, divine processions can be derived only from actions which remain in the agent, one with his essence. Relations to creatures are not real in him. Creation thus withering like a pricked balloon, what then of God's body? A divine person signifies a relation as subsisting. Numerical terms denote in God a transcendental multitude. Sursum corda, the Greek one many, has been seated in spirit. In such fiats of daring, the organum of Perotin vaults over modal Gregorian, pillared on the transhuman perfection of bare chords. Everywhere temporality is trained on the mystical. The civic and national work in the hierarchies of chivalry and church, as these Reims crusaders receive the symbolic host of earthly vanity and divine reward. Even the prescience of Bacon takes the cover of scholastic authority. Goliard poetry flowers in the monastic garden. Summaris Ecumenian, lively and cunning canon, has alternate words of pious Latin. How sprightly to lute, pipe, and viol, the Worcester Alleluia Psalat. Sacred manuscripts, the cathedrals themselves break into marginalia of fighting, drinking, and love, while the secularized drama issuing from the church doors fills the holy ground with juggling and profane farce. That these sports can be embraced on a psalter's beatus page, as the tumbler in the French Miracle devotes his dance to Our Lady, allows them a freedom from responsibility which after the Renaissance they could never claim, while their doubtful charter comments here on the fall and the drunkenness of Noah, sharpens their joy, heightening everywhere the plangent clash of Gothic. Meanwhile, below all remains the other center, suffusing primitive functionality with a haunting and unresolved enigma, neither happy nor sad, but beyond and above both, the mystery of the May morning, of bare chords, the archaic smile, Launcelot's night with Guinevere, in the country from which no stranger returns. Of course, this liberated energy ultimately dissolves the frames in which it is born, or formulates others of conscious responsibility, replacing the supermundane and non-temporal with the pride of man and earth. Though the dark sonorities of Susato's battle pavan, like the distorted skull in the foreground of Holbein's ambassadors, summons grandeur to the ennobling brunt of tragedy. This humanist shift occurs over a 400-year complex, of which we have now to define the stages. Consider the divide between 13th century Gothic in music ars antiqua and the late Gothic of the 14th century. In the cast left from the original Notre Dame St. Peter about 1220, the released force, the personality, is hierarchical, one with the transrational synthesis of faith. Even troubadour song and chivalric romance seem born outside time. Their logic is of selfless devotion, and it is to the crypt of silence that they return. Whereas in the so-called Boccaccio head from the Spanish chapel in Florence, mid-14th century, secular force and person stretch an already loosening ascetic creed. Town-dwarfing cathedrals yield to the civic claims of towered Italy and the trading North. Thomas Aquinas to the agitations of Wycliffe. Literature expands to Petrarch, Machaut, and Chaucer. Music to the exploratory modulations of Ars Nova. Yet all this vigor retains from the medieval some half-spaceless enigma of the earth pilgrimage. Between these style faces towers their 1300 boundary, the Divine Comedy, both Gothic synthesis and the liberating revolt of the new man. For Ars Antiqua we have heard Perotin with the Cathedral of Laon. Now, with the Ars Nova Amen of the Tournée Gloria, let us range later Gothic from Erwin von Strasbourg's 1300 facade design through Italy and France and back to Ely Crossing with its octagon. This art quickens with ingenuity, while the pure chord fabric of music widens for the progressive inventions of Huckett. Like that Gloria, the Gothic dome of Ely is 25 years past what we have called the 1300 divide. But since, in the continuous rebirth within Gothic, the same question will be posed by 1400, how to distinguish the 14th century from the 15th, which for all its medieval heritage we call early Renaissance, let us stake out the farthest advance of Italian Ars Nova and school of Giotto toward the natural harmonies to follow. Art offers an array of softening grace, from Giotto's tower, finished 50 years after his death, through the observation of Andrea and Nino Pisano, this Madonna del Latte, tender as Dante's stream of grace metaphor. No infant so quickly turns its face to the milk as I to dip eyes in that water. In fresco, the increasing immediacy ties this Altichiero to the 1390 miniatures of dei Grassi, while of recorded music, Landini's Gran Pian dagli Occhi most ripens toward the suavities of Dufay. Dei Grassi died a year after Landini. In his Visconti hours left, the intimate international style makes its furthest Italian and 14th century advance. But here we have coupled it with a comparable birth from the Turin miniatures, right, probably by Jan van Eyck, and some 30 years later, over the threshold of Chaucer's Pilgrims, when music too has ripened from the fifth-based poignance of Landini to Dufay's triadic counterpoint. In each art, early Renaissance defines itself. Within the old context of sacred myth and authority, the harmonious and observational, by quiet infiltration, have possessed the body of an ostensibly medieval universe. The revealed assumes the fabric of physicality, while the moods and details of earth find the consistency of their own ordering, though that order remains insular, not yet proclaimed of the whole. Yet in the rebirth ferment of the Florence of that time, the revolution of human power grows more absolute in theory and practice. As we face the frescoes on either side of the entrance to the Brancacci Chapel in the Church of the Carmine across the Arno, the linear thin continuance of Marcellino's Sin of Adam and Eve left, against the tragic might of the young Masaccio's expulsion, right. The conscious divide of 1425 piles itself on the style shift of 1400, quietly attested in Marcellino by the soft space and personality of international Gothic. But where the actual and embodied has made, in Masaccio, the breakthrough Alberti's treatise on painting ties to flesh, as long as breath remained to it, whoever spurned the flesh would spurn life itself. How can we call such an awakening insular? At its boldest, here Donatello's bust of Uzzano, about 1430, it must seem that the humanist transformation is complete. We have to remind ourselves that this force is cultivated in the shelter of an unchallenged faith frame, its daring permitted by ambiguity of values. So in Waller's Dialogue on Free Will, which Calvin and Leibniz would praise, reason heretically denies freedom, but within a fable of Tarquin and the Oracle, and over a return to patristic surrender, how is the pot to question the potter? We remain in the immediacy of rebirth, the secular as unvalidated antithesis in Catholic creed. Only by what would seem a backward step, the zeal of Reformation against that double talk, would we enter the late Renaissance phase of struggle, whereas the century of Donatello runs a sequence of naive delights. Earth and man not yet bound to self-responsibility for thought and act. In Gentile da Fabriano, in an isorhythmic Noel by Grenon, both about 1420, we wake to child renewal of the garden. The kings who kneel below have come through Tuscan hills above, like hunters mounted, with leopards and falcons, with hound and horn. That century heightens the realism without restating the aim. The walls of the Medici Chapel, under Gozzoli's legend of the same Epiphany, celebrate the bel vivere fiorentino. But that life is wider than Florence. Let us range Europe again with Dufay's C'est la face pâle, Kyrie, about 1450. from Ghiberti's doors to Van der Weyden's Bruges, and back to the Tuscan complement. Perhaps the most lovable picture of all for innocence and observation is Baldovinetti's fresco of the Birth by a ruin on a limestone ledge over the Val d'Arno, which by such mixed techniques as Leonardo would pursue has almost faded off the wall. In this, as in everything, it speaks that Florence, quant'è bella giovinezza, che si fugge tuttavia. In late 15th century Flanders, two painters press in opposite directions toward the human consciousness of 1500. Van de Gogh's Death of the Virgin, painted not long before his own death of melancholia, invokes the darkening tessitura of Ockeghem, or of this Tinctoris, three-voiced Kyrie. Even an anonymous English poem projects such imploration. Suddenly afraid, half waking, half sleeping, and greatly dismayed, a woman sat weeping, with favor in her face far passing my reason, and of her sore weeping this was the unchasten. Her son in her lap lay, she said, slain by treason. If weeping might right be, it seemed then in season. Against the passionate realism of Van der Gogh, Memling quietly enriches temporal celebration. So with the wreathing of sacred polyphony over the Europe of Josquin des Prés. As if in this martyrdom of Saint Ursula, the glow of figures, fabrics, reflecting armor, and background space continually voiced the overlapping delight of Pierre Delarue's six-part Holy, Holy, Holy. Yet all that earth praise flowers in the reliquary shrine of church containment. So the island harvest matures to high renaissance, that 1500 point of balance, where a now conscious humanism serves the old absolute which still embraces it. In this Leonardo, Mary draws Christ back from the lamb of his sacrifice. Anne, the lap of prophecy on which she rests, smiles acceptance, and before a landscape which is so often with Leonardo, exhibits the whole of earth history, mountains reared by the erosion that wears them down. Where else does tragic knowledge clothe itself in such shadowed smiles? For which the unrecorded Italian music would be Tromboncino's Lamentations. Botticelli was born only 7 years before Leonardo, grew up in the same Florence. His spring, with the equivocal thin smile of this Flora left, Roman goddess of flowers and of prostitution, was painted about 1478, when Leonardo was already exploring what would ripen to the 1510 Anne right. And yet a single composer, Isaac, at the Florentine court, exhibits both modes. In his ballades, the poignant grace of Gothic, in his great Laurentian elegy, the converse mystery of fullness. The achievement of 1500 is the cultivation of Renaissance rich repose over a creed of judgment and the life of the world to come. Such the praise of folly urbanity, by which Erasmus outraged Luther. In music there is the frottala and lauda harmony of chord progression, reared on the heritage of the church modes. A homophony also cultivated by the Flemings, as here by Compere. With painting, that calm horizon extends from the north, Memling and David, to the Italy of Leonardo, Perugino, Luini, Giovanni Bellini, early Raphael, Giorgione. This Carpaccio dream of St. Ursula enshrines its Venetian style center. But the mutant of Gothic force Savonarola had sowed in Medici Florence would rise through Ursula's sleep of dreams. By 1530, that fruitful island of suspended values is yielding to an expansive struggle of new against old, the old enfleshed by the new, a tragic birth, where the physical and human modes of the modern are stretched in the whirl of medieval contempt of earth and timeless faith. In the flexing of Michelangelo, this pensive Lorenzo from the Medici tombs, in the always more conscious control of musical space, a swelling tiento by the Catalan villa, we enter the tensile phase of late Renaissance, a style which, with its dynamic sequel, strains under the name of mannerism. Of Florentine early mannerists, Pontormo most sensationally breaks with high Renaissance, twisting the nude penitence of Jerome smiting his breast with a stone into a manic war with its framed space and barren landscape ground. In music, the degree inflection by which Josquin, for expressive grief, had wrenched the modes, advances about 1540 through Willaert, to the passionate chromaticism of Vicentino or of this De Rore. Reformation disrupting the North, Counter-Reformation tightening the South. Under both, a confident and now aroused humanism, struggling in science, politics, philosophy, for freedom and the power to build. In this turmoil, every stress communicating itself through the cultural ambience to each point of expression, Europe rises to a might of creativity, as giant men are pressed up from the whirling mass, flesh of that hypostasis of spirit. Venice heads the 1560 shift from the tensile bow of Michelangelo toward El Greco's kinetic arrow. With Titian's great myths, with the Ricercare of Andrea, first of the Gabrieli, the tethered is unleashed. Though the unleashing brings on the dark of tragic storm. To tie this passion to its archetype, oppose from its Christ beginnings one of those mild crucifixion allusions in catacomb art with the Gregorian Tenebrae, of which we have heard the opening. How quiet even the voice leap of the dying cry, my God, the drop through diabolic tritone to acceptance, et inclinato capite. Place that against the embodied agony, the last Pietà by Titian from his 90s, with Ingegneri's mighty rhetoric of the Tenebrae. Those vast forces over the 1600 divide of Bruno, El Greco, King Lear, have only to set, as in Cartesian formulable array, to precipitate another style century, the 17th, billowed up on the conscious assertions of Baroque. To try to render figures expressive, said Bernini, I put myself in the same attitude that I want to give the figure. In him, in grandis o vos omnes, causal reason and vindicating will dramatize the incarnate passion. But no sooner has that world-shaping introspection appeared in Cartesian confidence than it casts the shadow of Pascalian doubt. Its cloud-capped towers and solipsistic self are vulnerable. The reason that exalted them may let them down. In the heroic axioms, as at the wings of a temporal stage, the future of Rococo mockery and romantic pain wait their cue. As Eliot says in Gerontion, history has many cunning passages, gives too late what's not believed in, or if still believed, in memory only, reconsidered passion. Again, around the century mark, now of 1700, the ever-present change of history sharpens toward another quantum break. The massive Baroque vindication of divine order yields to Rococo wit, sentiment, and lightened play. Art darkens in Magnasco like the satires of Swift. It lightens in the frescoes of De Ferrari in Genoa this autumn, or of Ricci in Florence, to the airy artifice of Tiepolo and the France of Louis XV. And already the concerti grossi of Alessandro Scarlatti, Domenico's father, this affettuoso close of the last, enter the courtly salon, where rational disillusion and heart's revolutionary hope would both be entertained. What has so nonplussed the 1760 empiricist David Hume? Is it the ruffled repletion of some Johnsonian meal? Or is this the moment recorded in the appendix of his treatise on human nature, when, having pursued through years and volumes a system based on simple atomistic perception, though one might have guessed perceptions are ingatherings already tinged with self and world, he discovered, true to the logic he had played, that he stood in contradiction, what Kant would call antinomy, no way having started with the disconnected to account for any composition, self or substance, even to the power to think or say, I am. If perceptions are distinct existences, no connections are discoverable. All my hopes vanish when I come to explain the principles that unite our successive perceptions in our thought or consciousness. For my part, I must plead the privilege of a skeptic and confess that this difficulty is too hard for my understanding. So the transcendental imperative would become what the spirits demand of Faust, to reconstitute the lost world within. Bauer sie wieder, in deinen Busen bauer sie auf. Thus Runge renews incarnation from imagination, nature, and romantic heart. Beethoven sublimes sacred polyphony in the C-sharp minor quartet. It is the aspiration which, through all 19th century thickening of the bourgeois and material, and even in Nietzschean complementarity with that, spirals from 1800 Beethoven to 1900 Schoenberg, from Runge and Friedrich to the cubistic, Orphic, and Blauer-Reiter dissolution of spatial things, as Goethe's cry of spirits, build it in inwardness, would take in our century the voice of Rilke. Is it not this you wished for, earth, to be reborn in us, invisible? Erde, ist es nicht dies, was du willst, unsichtbar in uns erstehen? Was it the resurrection of the God who had entered time and flesh? Or could the Incarnate himself foretell the countdown of that resurrection? As Yeats asks of Leda, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop